Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Myth Salon. My name is Dana White, and I am the host of the Myth Salon. And today we have a wonderful presentation on India with Catherine Ann Jones, who has written a book called East and West Stories of India. My own adventures to India began about 10 years ago when I was sent to India to develop a book on the Ramayana. And during this, we went to Delhi, we went to Jaipur, we went to Agra, we went to Khajuraho, Varanasi, Udaipur, Mumbai, and Aurangabad, where they have the caves of Ajanta and Ellora. India is a fascinating place, and to say that there is one India is to kind of like say there's one America. I mean, there's differences throughout India that are cultural and geographic. I look forward to us getting this thing going this afternoon, and first thing I'd like to do is say a little less, and let's ring a singing bowl and have just a little moment of silence. I usually start the Myth Salon with a poem, but given the archetypal history and the deep roots of India in the foundation of human culture, I really thought I would not develop a poem as much as tap into some of the wisdom of India. So Sri Chinmoy says, India is the cradle of the human race, the birthplace of human speech, the mother of history, the grandmother of legend, and the great-grandmother of tradition. Our most valuable and most artistic materials in the history of humanity are treasured up in India only. And Swami Vivekananda, who I think became famous around the turn of the 20th century when he appeared at the Chicago Parliament of World Religions, says today's India is poverty-stricken, but tomorrow's India will be prosperous. She will be a mighty wave of hope and faith. Her very thought will be stirred with a new vision. Infinite will be the possibilities on her horizon. Her sacrifice will build a more durable foundation for mankind. She will contain within herself nationalism and internationalism, becoming the true symbol of spirituality in action. So, Will, I would like to turn it over to you, and coming to us live from an airport in Dallas, we may have a few jumps and starts as passengers are scurrying by and they're kind of wondering, what's this guy doing over there talking into that computer? So go for it, Will. Let's have some introductions and then get working with Catherine.
Well, thanks, Dana. Gosh, I wish I'd been to all those places you described in India. I'm actually coming from Calgary, Canada, back down to Austin, Texas to lead another Sermon of the Earth. But while I was up there, I ran into the Canadian Armed Forces at the biggest rodeo in the world. And there was an Indian man who was in the Canadian Armed Forces, and we had a really interesting conversation. There have been a lot of conversations with this guy, and there's been a trail of them lately about the significance of India in the larger global stage, uh, especially where things are going. Conversations about the role of India in gathering, in supporting, and integrating and nurturing the global South at a critical time, in providing a third option between the Western American-led world and the Chinese-led power structure we're seeing divide. Will India actually serve that role as an intermediating secondary, tertiary function? India has an incredibly interesting role to play, and I definitely believe in what was just read to us, that that the future for India is prosperous. And we, of course, with the Myth Salon and Myth House, have been making it a point to connect more with India. We brought on Sunil to lead a series of events, the Mythology Classroom, and he's come and joined us for a few of these. So we'll look forward to sharing this event with the Mythology Classroom and our friends in India, and hope that this will just generally continue to contribute to our interest in that larger conversation about India's participation right now in the world as it is, as we're experiencing it. So thank you, Catherine, for joining us. We're really grateful for that. Now it's my privilege to get to introduce each of us individually. So it'll just take me a moment to do that. And we like to read the full bios. With us for the first time is Dianne Skafte, PhD. Dianne Skafte received her PhD from the University of Colorado. For the past 10 years, she's taught depth psychology at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara, where she was an academic dean. Her book, Listening to the Oracle, published by HarperCollins in '97, has been translated into German, Spanish, and Dutch. Dr. Skafte lectures widely in the United States and Britain on oracular traditions. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Hey, I realize.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And back with us again tonight is Ashok Bedi, MD, is a Jungian psychoanalyst and a board-certified psychiatrist. He is a member of the Royal College of Psychiatrists of Great Britain, a diplomat in psychological medicine at the Royal College of Physicians and Surgeons of England, a distinguished life fellow at the American Psychiatric Association, and he is a clinical professor in psychiatry at the Medical College of Wisconsin in Milwaukee, and a training analyst at the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. His books include In the Eye of the Storm, Staying Centered in Personal and Collective Crises, The Spiritual Paradox of Addiction, Crossing the Healing Zone, Awaken the Slumbering Goddess, The Latent Code of the Hindu Goddess Archetypes, Retire Your Family Karma, Decode Your Family Pattern, and Find Your Soul Path and Path to the Soul. He's the liaison for the IAAP, International Association for Analytical Psychology, for developing Jungian training programs in India, and travels annually to India to teach, train, and consult with the Jungian developing groups at several centers in India, including Ahmedabad and Mumbai. He leads the annual Jungian Encounter with the Soul of India study group to several centers in India under the auspices of the New York Jung Foundation and the C.G. Jung Institute of Chicago. Thanks for being back with us, Ashok. We're really lucky to have you here with us tonight. Back with us again is Dyane Sherwood, PhD, trained at the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco, where she served on the board, was editor of a Jung journal, Culture and Psyche, and a frequent teacher for the analytic candidates and in public programs. She co-authored a book with the late analyst Joseph L. Henderson, relating a series of alchemical illuminations to the process of depth transformation. That book is Transformation of the Psyche, the Symbolic Alchemy of the Splendor Soulless, and we've put together a couple of events on that we'll share. Diane has also published on a wide range of topics, including the neurobiology of effective communication, the Lakota Vision Quest, and the influence of shamanism on the art of Wassily Kandinsky. She serves as a member of the editorial board of the Journal of Analytical Psychology. Her current interests include the integration of active imagination into analytic practice and alchemical images as representations of embodied awareness. Diane has a private practice in Evanston, Illinois, and consults with individuals and groups via video conference. She's a certified Jungian psychoanalyst and a child and adolescent analyst, a teaching member of the Sand Play Therapists of America, and a licensed psychologist. Thank you for being with us, Diane. My name is Linn. I'm founder of mythhouse.org. I deliver sermons of the earth for the Kintsugi Land Sanctuary and produce psychedelic mixtapes with Fascinated by Everything for domes, VR, and projection map parties. Past lives of mine include chairing a department at a film and performing arts college, professing myth, philosophy, and story, building the climate boot camp, leading projects for the Joseph Campbell Foundation, appearing in documentaries, co-hosting radio and television series, dissertating, and my PhD is in myth and depth psychology from Pacifica. Dana White, PhD, is our host, is a contributing faculty member to Pacifica's Myth Degrees and author or editor of numerous volumes on mythology, including the work he just described, taking him to India. He's been producing and hosting this Myth Salon with me since 2016. Hey, Dana. And finally now, to our featured guest of the night, Catherine Ann Jones. Catherine holds a graduate degree in depth psychology and archetypal mythology from Pacifica Graduate Institute, where she's also taught. After playing major roles in over 50 plays on and off Broadway, she became disappointed by the lack of good roles for women and wrote a play, On the Edge, about Virginia Woolf and her struggle with madness in a world gone mad, Hitler, and World War II. The play won a National Endowment for the Arts Award. 12 of her plays, including Calamity Jane, both the play and musical, The Women of Cedar Creek, and Freud's Oracle, have won multiple awards and are produced both in and out of New York. Her films include The Christmas Wife,
I'm a morning
Unlikely
writer.
Angel with Dolly
So I
Parton,
get up
and the
early,
popular TV series Touched by an
5:36.
Angel.
By 8
She's a
or
Fulbright
8:30,
scholar
then
whose
I am
research
at desk
whose
working
research was
on
in
a
India studying
project,
shamanism. She's taught for
plays
several
with
years at the New
audio
School University in New
work.
York, University of Southern
And
California in LA, and the Esalen and the Omega
I love
Institutes.
writing. I've been
Her
if
books, The Way
anything
of Story,
similar,
The
I
Craft and
would
Soul of
quote.
Writing, Heal
Many
Yourself
years
with
ago,
Writing,
my
What
theater
Story Are You
uniform
Living,
was
True Fables,
open.
Stories from Childhood,
Working in
Buddha
New
and the
York, I
Dancing Girl, A
visited,
Creative Life, and East West, A Story of India are used in many schools, including New York University writing programs. Based in Ojai, California, she leads The Way of Story and Heal Yourself with writing workshops throughout the United States, Europe, Middle East, and Asia. Thank you for being with us, Catherine. I hope you will now take us away and we will follow you for the ride.
Thank you, Will. By the way, I'm the only one here without a PhD. I got the master's. So I bow to your credits. Could you or Dana read those two excerpts from the introduction by Dr. Skafte?
East and West, Stories of India. The stories of India take place on multiple levels of reality. Themes from ancient mythology are woven into worldly events. Forces of destiny thwart one's desire, then open splendid new gateways. Ardent love from a past incarnation reaches across centuries and heals a wound of the heart. Uncanny dreams warn of danger ahead. For me, following these stories was like watching a drama unfold on the stage, then looking up at a higher platform and seeing the gods enacting a play of their own. India's soul contains stories within stories, millions of layers deep. Strange and familiar, ancient and contemporary, human and divine. They beckon us to know them so that we may better know ourselves. Stories of India opens a gateway to wonders we will long remember.
That was written by Dr. Dianne Skafte, who's on the panel. I could tell she really understood the stories when I read her wonderful introduction. I thought I'd read, I have a very short preface I wrote for the book, and that maybe will throw us into the discussion. This is a quote from an old friend of mine from New York, Muriel Rukeyser, the poet. She said, "The world is made up of stories, not atoms." End of quote. Stories orient the life of a people through time, establishing the reality of their world. Thus, meaning and purpose are given to people's life. Without stories, we do not exist. They are how we discover who we are. This particular collection of stories is imagined, though sometimes inspired by fact. They came about because of marriage that carried me away to far off India, which in time became my spiritual home. India is a vast and complex country, and one that can change a life, containing the highest mystical experiences side by side with the lowest dregs of humanity. From my own experience of living many years in India, the sublime mythology of this incredible and complex culture so permeates the personal that myth often becomes reality and reality myth. The aim of these stories is to serve as a kind of portal into the daily lives and emotional realities that reflect the rich depth and humanity that is India. Also, after I completed the stories and I was sending them off to my publisher in England, I found this quote by Albert Camus, And it seems so perfect to what I attempted to do with this book of stories. So I'll share this quote. Fiction is the lie through which we tell the truth. I thought that was a great quote and really nailed, because to me, all fiction is disguised autobiography in one way or another. It might interest, I'll just say briefly how I came to write the short stories, because as you heard, my background was in the theater as an actor, then playwright. Then I was invited to Hollywood to write movies and television. And for the last few years, I've been writing nonfiction books. During my Fulbright year in India, I wrote one story, which is in the book. And my goal was to write a book of short stories set in India. But life, when we're busy making plans, life pulls us in different directions. So after the Fulbright year, I didn't write any more stories. I was pulled back to theater and playwriting. But the one short story I wrote called Rukmani's God was published in a journal in London called Poetry London Delhi, I think it was called. Anyway, a publisher in Cambridge, England, read it, contacted me 30 years after I wrote the story and said, would I write 14 more stories for a book of stories set in India? And I remember thinking, I always meant to do that. I have found in my life the best things have happened to me unexpected and uninvited. I really believe this concept of dharma, from the Sanskrit word meaning the law of your existence, that if you follow it, visible and invisible allies will arise to guide the way. So that's how I came to write the stories. And it was during COVID, so I couldn't go to India. I've made 43 trips. I usually go every year to my home in South India. And somehow India came to Ojai, California through this request to write the stories. So I was able to be in India in my home here. So life is mythical and magical. The stories range, they're in different cities. One is even dealing with a past life. I mentioned that a lot of the stories have a grain from my own personal experience. I'll give one example, and then I'd like to open it to the panel, to our distinguished panel, to hear what they say. After my Fulbright year, the government of India brought me back. I think they called it Distinguished Guest of India or something like that. And they took me to Jaipur. And I also practice as a psychic and an astrologer. So I had heard of a well-known astrologer in Jaipur. So when I was asked who would I like to meet, I mentioned this astrologer. Well, he looked at my chart, and this, of course, is Vedic astrology. And one of the things he said that was pretty amazing, he said I was a temple dancer in a past life. So I forgot about that. A month later, I was back in New York City where I was living then. And New Year's Day, I went to a New Year's Day party. And I was standing there, and across the room, a woman I had never seen before, she had long black hair and piercing green eyes, came directly toward me. She didn't introduce herself. She walked up and said, "You were a temple dancer in a past life in India." That was her opening statement. And this was 2 or 3 weeks after the astrologer had said that. So that became a story of a Westerner who connects through meeting this woman whose past life regresses her. And it goes back to the 18th century in India and her life as a Devadasi, which is a practice in India where for hundreds of years, families would give a young daughter about age 8 to a temple, and they would be raised in the music and dance, traditional classics. And part of what they would do is they could become mistresses of the rajas or the princes of the time. Anyway, so that story encompasses, it goes back and forth, modern and past lives. So that's the one other quick example. I was invited to teach a master class in acting at the National School of Drama. They pretty much follow the British approach to acting. They're very well trained in voice and body, which is important. And my training was with Lee Strasberg and Uta Hagen, the method in bringing your inner life to the role more. They were doing a Greek tragedy, Oedipus Rex. The messenger comes and announces in a monologue that the king has been killed. And his voice was good, his body was good, but nothing was happening dramatically. So I took him aside and I said, and this was just a few weeks after Rajiv Gandhi was killed, who had been head of India, Indira Gandhi's son. And I said, say the words from the play, but I want you to think of Rajiv Gandhi. And he did this, and the whole atmosphere changed, and the whole class had tears in their eyes. So that's a small part in the story. Oh, the story is called Tea with Mrs. Gandhi, because my husband and I were involved while Mrs. Gandhi was prime minister. We were invited to a private tea with her. And we were alone in the room with her with 2 Sikh bodyguards standing near us by the side. And this was just a few months before she was assassinated by those Sikh guards. So that becomes not the whole story, but part. So I think most writers, even when they're writing fiction, it comes alive when you use something you've seen and lived. I hope that's enough to bring on some questions or comments, and I'm open. I'll open the floor now. Thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing those stories and your personal experience. It definitely helps us all come into this space with you and what you've gone through creating these. I don't want to jump in with an initial question or comment, just to open the door and swing towards our guest panelists. Are any of you ready and have a thought that you'd like to come in with?
Well, Catherine, thanks again. And, I'm so delighted that in your introduction, some of the material you decided to include was that experience where that woman came up to you at that party and said, you have been a temple dancer. Because my own question to you, and I'm going to preface it just a little bit, has to do with that story, which I must say, out of all the stories which I loved, it had such an effect on me. So here's what I'd like to say, and I'll be as brief as possible. So, I mean, we all know this, being spiritual and being like Jungian oriented, but when a story or an experience has multidimensional layers, it reaches into us in a whole different way than one that might be interesting or dramatic, but is only in one dimension. And this story, and many of your others too, but the story of my life as a Devadasi had that quality. And so what I'd like to do just very briefly is point out the layers that I saw because they had such an effect on me. And then ask you about your process and whether writing that story shifted you at all. I guess it did, but I'd love to hear about that.
Okay.
So inspired by this amazing event, and thank you for saying it, because that way we're all aboard. In the story, the first layer is the life of Suzanne, you know, a well-known and successful actor on the stage. We learn she has a boyfriend, she's looking forward to her next part, etc., like all of our lives. That's layer number one. We can relate to that. But then when that mysterious woman with the green eyes at the party rushes up to her and said, you know, you were once a temple dancer in India, that everything shifts just a little bit. But it really shifts when your character, Suzanne, through a series of hypnotic sessions, begins to remember in detail, and you do it so well. I mean, I was there with that, you know, the young girl as she was brought to the temple, falling in love with a Raja, having a child, these very dramatic and deep experiences. So suddenly you see another whole layer comes, which you did, of course, intentionally, to Suzanne's experience. And that those experiences change who she is at layer one. So now, and you did this also beautifully, she makes different decisions for her life. And we know she wouldn't have made those decisions. They're life affirming decisions because of her uniting with this other dimension of herself. And so I just want to, you know, say thank you for that. And share quickly, very briefly, my own experience was, as I was reading about Suzanne and her multidimensional experiences, these, you know, memories and little fragments of past life came to me. I thought, now that, and they weren't anything like hers. I thought, okay, it has opened the door. So
Yes.
anyway, with that preface, I'd like to ask you, anything you want to share about your process in writing this particular story, and whether there was like even a fourth layer of you shifting a bit from having engaged with these different dimensions.
Wow, thank you. You know, in the preface, I said, my goal is that these stories would be a portal. And you just confirmed that, which is nice to hear. Once I was interviewed several years ago, and some journalists asked me, do you believe in past lives? I said, no, I don't believe in past lives. They're a fact. I know that they are. I've had experiences since I was 7 years old, you know, with figures standing by my bed at night, my invisible friends, I call them. So, of course, there is an interconnection there. And writing it, I think karmically did remove certain, because we come into this life with baggage, not only DNA from ancestors and parents or environmental, but also way back hundreds of lives. You know, there's usually 2 or 3 that are more predominant than others. I've often said this, but writing's the best therapy I know. Even though I trained as a Jungian psychologist, I've never done the therapy. Somehow the spiritual work with Advaita Vedanta helped the process. But to me, writing's the best therapy. That's why I teach these writing workshops, Heal Yourself with Writing, about self-healing, grief, and trauma, and so on. And I see a wonderful reaction, how people self-heal through the writing prompts and such. In terms of process, someone interviewed me and did a podcast about this book, and they asked me, how do you navigate your stories? And I remember feeling bothered by the question, by the word navigate. And I said, well, I really don't navigate them. A premise will come intuitively to me, or a character. And then if I'm very lucky, I get out of the way and the characters take over and tell the story. So that's my process. And I know it seems abstract, but it's literally so. And some of the things I've written, one of the stories is called Murder in Assam. It's pure fiction, or so I thought. I've never been to Assam. It just kind of came through me. And through a series of a writer friend of mine, Ravi Ravindra, sent the story to someone he knows in Bangalore. And she wrote back that what I had written actually happened. And it made me think of, Plato's oversoul idea that all of history, all of knowledge is up there somewhere. And sometimes creatives can pierce that veil and things can channel through. So what is real? What is myth? What is fiction? I think it's a melting pot. And I feel very fortunate that I can sometimes, I wish it were always like that. It's not, of course, but sometimes I can tap into that and just get out of the way. Thank you, Diane. I really loved your response.
Thank you so much. I really valued hearing that.
Yeah.
Catherine, do you think that there are themes that are uniquely Eastern, like Indian, or Western, like America or the Western world? And what's the attraction to connecting stories East and West?
Well, my experience, I've taught all over the world now, and I just find themes are universal. They may take different form, but I don't see a great divide between people. The title Story East and West deals with that difference of it's the father-son story about the son is very influenced by America. He thinks America's the future, India's the past. He tells his traditional father, who's a professor of Sanskrit in South India, and it deals with the shadow of both countries. He ends up going to MIT and so on. But I think that story taps into what you're asking, is that difference. And he realizes the wealth of India and the shadow of America. That, every country has its shadow. We certainly do here. We see it on CNN every day. And so that was one of my goals, is to write about the light and the shadow side of this great and complex country. I'd really like to hear from Dr. Bedi, if that's possible, because I was very concerned that Indians might be offended by some of the stories that are rather, dark. And so far, from the Times of India to different responses, people have told me, no, these stories should be told, and I haven't. But I'd love to know what you responded, not only as a Jungian, but as an Indian.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Catherine. I ordered your book after I got on the panel. I loved it. I could not put it down. So first of all, it is quite...
That's all right. You've done your job.
It was an enchanting series of stories. And then as I sat to analyze my experience of how I felt reading this book, I had a strange series of feelings and reactions, and I'll share them and hopefully put them together. First of all, my first reaction was looking at these stories as an Easterner looking out at the Western guests in India. When I was a medical student in India and aspiring to go to England to get my training and be a good, famous psychiatrist and all that sort of stuff. And I did live out my dream. I went to Oxford, got my training and all that stuff. So there was this view. And at that time, when I was a student, we had a lot of young people from the West, particularly Americas, the Peace Corps and such, coming to India. And we, the medical students, the elite of the medical, will always be intrigued and laughed at these people. We thought they were, fools coming, wasting their time, wasting our time. We call them the karma cola crowd, coming to get enlightenment in a few weeks or a few months and go back change. And sort of we'll laugh about them. And then I came to the West, and I saw the same stories, similar stories to the stories that you have written about, people who are fascinated by East and want to go and harvest the mystery of the East and understand it. And I had a whole different view of my own country through their eyes, like you have. You've been able to, so it gave me sort of a three-dimensional view that you get when you look at things with both eyes, not just one eye. And I started to see something totally different. That what I looked at from the East was sort of an overflow of what I thought was the shadow of the West. And when I am in the West here as a healer and as a participant in this collective, I now look at the shadow of the East. Yeah, people in India, they want to come to America or West and, make be rich and famous and popular and write books and do all kinds of stuff. And I said, well, what a shadow. They came from there to kind of do all this when people from here are going there to harvest the mystery of their own soul. So it was very confusing for a while. And so both sides were living out their dreams and their shadow, projecting it out to the other side. And then it dawned on me that it was a projection of one's own self, because as I think Diana put it, there are many Indias and there are many Americas. And when you come to America, you can tune in to whichever America you want to tune into. You can tune into its highest sort of soul and its highest principles of democracy and scholarship and generosity and so forth. And or you can go get caught in money laundering or make a big buck and live a very material life and never touch any deeper part of yourself. So you can find the America you want. Similarly, those who came from the West to the East found the India they were looking for, their unlived India. Some found light and some found shadow. Your stories are both of light and shadow. And then it emerged that basically it's a human story, because each one of us is like that Russian doll, and you can peel layers and layers, and the story stops where you stop looking. And of course, in India, we would say that if you keep deconstructing your own story, if you letting go of these layers of yourself, what are the script in the scriptures, they say neti neti principle in Sanskrit, in the Vedanta tradition. Neti neti is not that, not that. So I'm not that, I'm not that. So if you start peeling the layers, what remains is a Mr. Nobody, someone who's just a faint version of themselves, but is a quintessence, is their soul essence. And that part, Atman, is worthy of merger with Brahman. That's the moksha. So the question is to find those layers of yourself in India or in America, and then letting go of them. And then you get to your core. And that is your quintessence. And I think you can get that experience as an Indian in America or as an American in India if you are searching for yourself. So essentially, people coming to East are searching for their lost soul. And just as people coming to the West, they think they're coming to gain some higher standard of living or knowledge or whatever they're looking for, name and fame. But they basically then see the futility of that and gradually start finding their soul. And now from the East, from West, I'm now intrigued, re-enchanted by India. And I go there every year to find what I escaped and say, wow, this is what I thought was I wanted to get away from, but I only got that antarchakshu, the inner vision about my own mystery, about my own people, my own culture, through the West in a way, because that gave me the necessary distance. And I think perhaps that is the same for Westerners who go to India. They get the necessary distance from the West to find their spiritual essence. So it works both ways, and I think that was intriguing. The core of human condition is search for the self, and you can find it in a ghetto in America, or in an highest university, or as an ashram in India, as far as you keep searching.
Well
Those
said.
are my feelings and thoughts about your wonderful
Yeah.
book. Yeah.
Very well said. You know, I've observed Americans who go to India. They will either fall in love with India or they'll have the total opposite experience. They'll say, oh, never go there again. And what came to me, and you touched on this, is that India intensifies whatever's within each individual. So you're made to see yourself as you really are. And that can be Atma eventually, or it can be the opposite. But India is not a country you go to and someone says, how was it? And they'll say, oh, it was okay. It's going to be one extreme or it's not going to be a small experience, whatever it is. What you were saying reminded me, I don't know if you had a chance to read The Men's Club.
I did, yes.
Yes, because about the Muslim, the Hindu, and the Christian, the three
Right.
Indians who've been friends for 30 years, and they meet one went to, I can't remember if
Right.
it was Oxford or Cambridge, but I was reminded of your story when you were talking. But thank you. I'm glad that threw you into your own history there.
Yes,
so to
thank
speak.
you.
Yes.
I just wanted to comment on, one of our friends, Jeff Kreipal, if you remember him, as down at the UT. He's at Rice doing the religious studies department with an emphasis on esoteric studies. Jeff Kreipal, I saw him give a talk at the American Academy of Religions on esoteric Hindu philosophy. And basically what he was saying is that we have esoteric philosophy and traditions in the West. There's deep meditative traditions, deep esoteric tarot, you name it. And it's also there in the East. But that when the West, that in the East, in India, his argument was that not everyone in India is fixated on the esoteric side of the Hindu tradition. That really it was Westerners that really went, and when they went to India, they focused on the esoteric side of the Hindu tradition. And he's saying the reason for that is because the same individuation process, we're looking for that which is repressed, unconscious, beneath the surface. We're looking for that esoteric. And so we're looking for the other and the esoteric, but we're looking for it in the other esoteric. The Hindu is esoteric. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, that really, like you say, it's a projection of ourself. We're really going to explore our own inner other. But for some reason, there's something enchanting about exploring our own inner other when it's truly other. And going into mystical Christianity, for example, might not really truly be experienced other. And so we need that otherness and that distance to really be able to stretch and expand and grow in the way that the people have when they explore those traditions. So I thought that was really interesting, and I thought I'd bring in Jeff's thought about that.
I think consciously or unconsciously, each individual is searching for the self. It's a little like a train journey from LA to New York. Some people will get off in Arizona, some in Chicago. Not everyone will get to New York, but it's an evolutionary journey. But I think life is consciously or unconsciously a search for that. Call it Atma or individuated self, whatever. And that's the journey. And it's whatever it is, it's sometimes challenging, but it's certainly never boring.
You know, I was just reflecting, thinking back to my own experiences in India, and I went there fascinated with the ancient culture, and having read Jung and Zimmer on India. And while I was there, I met Carmel Bergson, who was from New York. I don't know if you know her work. She did photographs of the caves back when she had guys holding tin pieces of tin to try to get the light from the outside to the inside, because you weren't allowed to have lights in there or use flashes. But for me, in a search for the self, I'm thinking about it's not just other, it's an ancient culture. It's so ancient and so full of imagination. And sometimes we need to experience something other in the other place, because it's so repressed and ignored in our own culture. And our own culture is so limited that there are these incredible gifts that Indian culture has for us, or Indian cultures, you know, whether it's thinking of a man in the South who told me how worried he was because he thought his daughter might be eating root vegetables up in Delhi, because he was a Jain. But it seems to me that fascination, when I heard Ashok talking about it, it's like people come to the West, to the United States. I think there's a lot of ego that you were referring to, like wealth, fame, and of course, a better standard of living. People want a better way of life for their families, but India is worthy. It seems to me you took on a worthy project to bring not just something about the culture, but to bring the experience of what it's like to be immersed in a world that's almost like the world of our dreams. I think that a lot of Westerners, if they aren't on a tour, a carefully curated tour, and they actually go alone to India, they're terrified, aren't they? They meet something that can be quite frightening for them. And I haven't had a chance to read your stories. I just learned about this yesterday. And so I wonder if any of your stories talk about the reaction of a Western person to the stimulation and variety of humanity and images that they discover in India.
Yes, several of the stories do that. I use myself as a kind of prototype, not that all the facets of the story are true, but I would think several of them do. I have a young woman from the Midwest who goes to Kerala to study the martial arts of Kerala, which are kind of like the great martial arts of Japan. They go way back. And it ends up being a murder. It's called The Body in the Well, that story. And it's a romantic story with a murder. So, but several of them do. I have a Westerner who immerses and responds to India. It's the most complex culture I know. India. I mean, I think Varanasi, one story is set in Benares or Varanasi, and it's an extreme version of the extremes. You'll see sadhus with enlightened, piercing eyes that are spiritual and in trances and so on. And then you see beggars who will mutilate their children, cut off a hand, because they'll earn more money as begging's a profession in India. So these extremes, and then you'll see mad people or someone with a disease you associate with the Middle Ages. You know, in America, we hide our mad people, we put them away. We even put away our old people. And so everything is kind of, I don't want to say sterilized, but whereas in India, it's all there. It's an onslaught of different tiers of reality. You know, you can't make up what you actually just see in India. It's a great and complex and you know, light and shadow. It's my spiritual home, but I see the shadow side too. See people walking by a dying person on the street, and they think, well, it's his karma, so I shouldn't interfere. I actually had a personal experience where I was living in an ashram, and the Western parents were always meditating and ignoring their 5-year-old child. And one day I walked by and I noticed the little boy was just sitting on a stone, not moving. And I walked up to him and hookworms were coming out of his mouth. So I went to the parents and they said, oh no, the guru will take care of him. And, you know, they couldn't be bothered. So the American in me just woke up, and I just took the child and got a taxi, and we were about 15 minutes from a Christian clinic in Kerala. The Christians have been there for 2,000 years. Thomas, one of the 12 disciples, went there. And he told me if I had waited 24 hours, the child would be dead. You know, so that's the shadow side of this great philosophy and country. So I did put that example in the story. I forget which one, but I think it's there. That's why once someone asked me, what is your philosophy? And I said, well, I'm somewhere between Advaita Vedanta and Jungian psychology. That was my cocktail I made for my life, because the Jungian brought the humanity back to me, I felt, after my years. I was 22 when I went to India for 1 month and stayed 2 years. That was my first trip. But something in me would not let go of the humanity. I couldn't let that go. And so later when I studied depth psychology, that helped me on my journey balance my life of that.
Well, I think that we have webs in our stories that always allow the characters to interconnect with something that we recognize within us. And I'm thinking of how Western creatives or musicians went to India not to really learn something outside themselves, but to awaken something that was within themselves.
Yeah.
You know, to find something. And I think particularly George Harrison, you know, who came back transformed. And a lot of people, when they come back, they have this experience of a culture that's so vast. I mean, It's 5 times the size of the population of the United States. I think what do we have, 300 million people in the United States? Well, you can fit that in a corner of India.
It's like Europe, the US, and Russia combined.
I find that the one thing that really makes India coherent is its acceptance, its self-acceptance. The people, they may come out of a caste system, but we have a caste system in the West. We may not call it that,
Yeah.
but we have an in-place caste system that is almost impossible to penetrate. I was struck by the accessibility and the friendliness of the people that we encountered. We went to a place called the Dara village, and they were largely a performance-based kind of place. They did dances for tourists and things like that. But it was a way in which they could communicate what they had as Indian culture to non-Indians who would come there and visit. I can take that home. When we went there, one of the things we asked and we were advised is bring things for young children. So we brought coloring books and pencils and pads and notepads and small T-shirts and a lot of things that we felt were useful. There really was a spirit of community in the way that they received it and they came forth. And the schoolhouse that we visited, I'm sure we made an impact. We went to a textile factories, and these various places in India are much more available, say, than I feel that if you walked into a textile factory in downtown Los Angeles, they would probably think you were with the immigration services or something like that, and there would be a problem. There was nothing but curiosity and receptivity from the point of view that we received it. And I just was touched by the ongoing, I felt safe.
Dana, what year were you there?
I was
This-
10 years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because India has changed a lot in the last 10 years. That's what sometimes not only India, but a lot of other countries are influenced by Americans. Sometimes they will absorb not the best traits of America, but
How do you mean it's changed? Give me an example.
I was there just before COVID. That was my 43rd trip there. And one thing I have always enjoyed is the sweetness of India. It just permeates the air, the sweetness of the people and the welcoming. Even you go into a tea shop or store or whatever. That has changed to some degree. I'll give you a funny example. I was in Delhi and I was going to meet a friend of mine, and I wear Indian clothes when I'm in India. Not saris as much, but the long blouses and the chudas and the pants.
Like the kurtans.
The kurtas, yes. So I was wearing that in a coffee shop in Delhi. And I came a little early and I was looking around, and I was the only Westerner in the restaurant, in the shop. And I was the only person wearing Indian clothes. All the Indians were wearing blue jeans and, and I thought, this is India, mostly North India, where I think your travels were.
Like Rajasthan?
Yes, that's north. But South India is very different. It has held more of the old traditions. It was less influence from the Muslim and the British Raj than the North.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm not saying the sweetness isn't there, but I don't know, Dr. Bedi, have you gone back to India in the last several years? Do you notice a change? And also, the leadership now in India is very, like a lot of places in Europe, it's gone very far right.
Right.
Do you
Yes,
notice
certainly.
that, Dr. Bedi?
Yeah, certainly. I go every year, so I agree with what you are describing. So the persona has changed, but I think the soul has stayed the same. If you
Yes.
feel through it a little bit, you get back to it. One reflection I would have on your observations, all of the panel, is that any experience can be a mirror to your soul. Meeting another person can be a mirror to the soul. Going to an Italian vacation could be a mirror to some part of your romantic self. So,
Mhm.
but there is something, I always wondered if there was something unique about the Indian mirror to the soul. Is it any different? Maybe just a little more older. And then it dawned on me that perhaps there is something unique about India as a mirror to one's soul. And why would that be? Because India is still living in its archetypal kind of matrix. The ideas of reincarnation and karma are not theories or books. We just believe it. It's, I totally believe that my wife and I have been companions in many lifetimes, and we'll probably be stuck with each other for many more. It's
Yeah,
not a
yeah,
it's not a speculation. It's a given. It's a belief
exactly,
system, and
exactly.
and I think you see the echoes of that we travel in soul groups. All these kooky esoteric ideas are mainstream maple staple of Indian thought. So, but what it means to us is it is living the archetypes. It is living the myth. It's a Indian
Exactly.
life even now. Even
Yes.
people who have launched the, I know my colleagues. My brother is a nuclear physicist, so I know his colleagues in India, and they were part of this Mars project and all that stuff. And when you go to their home for a cup of tea or a meal, they believe all this cookie stuff that you write about in your book, the past life and so forth. They're totally, well, yeah, that's that, and I'm a nuclear physicist, but this is also my reality. So those layers are still alive in India.
Yes, totally,
And so when a
totally.
Westerner goes there,
Yeah,
they get a reflection of whichever part of themselves they are ready to receive back from
yes,
that soul mirror.
yeah.
And that you'll only perhaps find in a place like India.
To me, the philosophy is much deeper,
Yeah.
more profound than, and it's the older and older
Yeah.
too, than what I found in the West.
Yes.
But, we study mythology. Indians live it every
Yes.
single day. You
Mhm.
just go to a temple, or my story called Lakshmi's Treasure. I mean, her relationship to the temple and all, even after her son is abducted, and it's they live it. They live it, and as you say, a nuclear physicist will live it as well as a peasant in the field.
Mhm.
It's ingrained,
Right. Mhm.
no, it's unlike any place.
Mhm.
My friend does tell me though, he's part of what we talk about is that he says that like everywhere, the kids know the stories less and less. And that's something he, as a mythologist in India, struggles with and experiences a bit of a calling to make sure that people learn the stories that have been so important for so long, and also the diaspora of India, which is so gargantuan, that they continue to have services and support to learn the stories. So I'm inspired by what you say. I'm just curious if that echoes true to you, if it's also now a struggle as you mentioned, the last 10 years, the influence of the Western American world reaching a new kind of place. If you experience that as well, do they have to work hard right now to
Well,
protect
I
that
agree.
heritage?
I agree with what Dr. Beatty said, that on a phenomenal level, the negative influences are there. Greed is more pronounced, or a kind of insensitive human response, but the soul of India will always be there as long as there are the great beings, the great sages that still exist, though they're few. There are a lot of charlatans, but the real is still there. You know, it's very
Who are
interesting.
the good ones? We want to know the good ones you've sifted through. Sorry, you're about to say something else, but I want to know the answer to that.
You know, Carl Jung, I learned this from a French doctor and his wife who were friends with Carl Jung. And when he was in India, he was supposed to go to Kerala to meet this householder sage. And the night before his trip, he had a dream. And I don't remember the details of the dream, but he interpreted the dream that since he was born in the West, he should follow the Western way. And he canceled the trip south. I've always wondered what would have happened if he had gone south. I will always wonder about that. But in a way, something with Jung, he wanted to stay, you know, his identification as a Western person. And anyway, I just thought I'd mention that. I don't know if that's written anywhere. It's
Yeah,
a private story.
It is in
It
the
is.
it is Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. He had a dream about the Holy Grail and that he must return to the West and
yeah.
complete his search. And it was reading an alchemic classic.
Yes,
He took it
that's-
with him to India so that he does not get caught in India. He was afraid
Yes.
he will be assimilated, contaminated, and he would have been, because I think those
Yes.
who get caught in India, like you, Catherine, they cannot get out.
I am forever caught in India.
Because then you are sort of wed to it. There is a sacred marriage with it. So he
It's
chose he
true.
was going to meet with
Yeah.
Maharsha
Rama Maharshi and
Yeah.
also this sage. And
Yeah, so
and
that
Kerala.
he chose not to meet with some of these holy people because he was fearful that he may get caught in the matrix and not get out. So and then you're right, he would have been caught. We would not have analytical psychology if he had stayed on there any longer.
Or we would have had a different kind.
Or a
of
whole different kind of
Who knows?
analytical psychology, right?
Mhm.
This discussion, which is so great, and your reference to the ashram. I think that story about the little child that wasn't cared for was from the story of the ashram. So what I wanted to ask you was this. So I looked at all the stories and I looked at what person they were written in. Almost all the stories are written in the third person, but two of them are written in the first person. And I've always been interested. I've never asked you this about your decision there, your process, but one of them is My Life is a Devadasi, and the other one is the ashram. And so it follows and that first person account is like each one of them, you can't forget it because there's so much out of experience. And in a way, for me, this plugs into what we're talking about the shifts in India that's happening. Our guru's the same, yes, some are, but there's so many shifts. And I don't know whether you'd be willing to share any of your own a relationship with that story, the ashram. I mean, I know that experience was intensely important to you, but whatever you want to share about that, I think it gives an even deeper dimension to the very fine story that you wrote.
I wrote a memoir called Buddha and the Dancing Girl, which is an archetypal metaphor for my life and for the book. I lived in Japan as a child, young child, preschool, and I had two experiences that imprinted me deeply. One was my Japanese nanny took me to see this great Kamakura Buddha near Tokyo. It's 900 by 500 feet, huge. And I was 4 years old and I looked up and I remember thinking when I was 4, oh, this is what they mean by God. So that Buddha sculpture was my first image of God. The same year, my parents took me outside Tokyo to the Cherry Blossom Festival. And there were geisha-like dancers, actresses dancing on a stage. And I ran off. I wanted to join the company, age 4, and I was missing for 2 hours. So these two imprints became my archetypal metaphor. As Jung would say, my tension of opposites, the search for God or the spiritual versus this compulsion to create dramatically, acting, dramatic writing, film, plays, and so on. And that became a pendulum swing. I would have some success as an actor or a playwright. And the very next day, I'd go off to India for 1 to 3 months. You know, it was like this pendulum. And so the theme of my autobiography is that tension of opposites, because of course, eventually they have to merge and be one, not two. But the ashram story you asked me about is not literally my experience. My teacher was a householder sage, and it was not a public ashram. Householder sage meaning he had a wife and children and so on. And the family didn't want anything in the book to reveal who and where. It's interesting, his father, who was his own guru, was the guru, the sage who influenced Joseph Campbell and caused me to become friends with him by accident. I had just come back on my annual trip visiting my spiritual teacher and went to Buffy Johnson and Gerald Sykes, the married couple. He's a writer, she's a painter. And I walked in and they said, oh, you must meet someone because he loves India too. And they introduced me to someone I had never heard of or never read called Joseph Campbell. And he talked about how India changed his life, that he went to Kerala and he met this great sage and listened to his talks. And he said, my whole life changed. And I said, who was it? And Joe said, well, you wouldn't know of him. He's not a public figure. I said, well, I'd like to know who it was. And he told me the name. And I said, I have just this week come from his son. And the whole atmosphere in the party changed. Joe took me by the hand. We went to a corner and for an hour we talked. And that was beginning of a very valued friendship with he and later his wife. That's what I mean, you know, when you follow that dharmic, that inner, do it totally and not for motives, but just surrendering to that force that's more than the individual. Things happen. Things that you couldn't imagine. And of course, that was a value. I write about Joe in my book. He had a quality I've only seen in 2 people in my career. Even toward the end of his life, and I knew him in his later years, he never lost that adolescent enthusiasm for mythology. You can tell it on the Bill Moyer's Power of Myth series. When he talks, it's like a 19-year-old that's discovered what he wants to do with his life. He never lost that. And I think that's amazing because, you know, we start doing what we're doing creatively out of love and enthusiasm. Then we become professionals and deal with New York and Hollywood, and to retain that kind of passion and enthusiasm. I've only seen it twice. The other one was Harold Clurman directed my first play, the Virginia Woolf play. And he was in his 70s or 80s. He did the plays of Tennessee Williams and Eugene O'Neill, a great Broadway director. And he made me think this play was the most important thing in the world. It was my first long play, but he had the same thing I later saw in Joe Campbell. It's a rare gift. but, and you can't fake it, you know, it was authentic. But the ashram I sat in North India, and it's not exactly what I didn't divulge my own spiritual thing, but the characters surrounding the sage, the prototypes are real people. So again, you know, it's like you make a stew, a little bit of your own experience, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, and then a lot in the imagination. So.
It seems to me you're talking about the value of overcoming perhaps our programmed insularity and making contact with another, whatever the other happens to be, but actively seeking out other. And if we only surround ourselves with these influences that reinforce or are redundant to our upbringing, it seems to me we just go deeper and deeper into the bandwidth of whatever it is that we were raised to become. But I think Joseph Campbell is a good example. He encouraged the development of the self through the sense of calling, that somehow or another you can become your own hero by taking out, finding the path, whether it's a pilgrimage or an adventure. You go out and you make contact with somebody or something that kind of confronts your insularity or sensibilities.
I have never thought everyone should follow the same path, be it Advaita or Jungian. I'm very strong individualist, and each one has to find their own path. I think what matters is going to the end of it, you know, not just do grocery shopping, little of this, little, you know, pick one and go to the end of it. And if it's not enough, you'll be led to the next step. So, I mean, for me, I can say my path is the only one for me. I would never say it has to be for everyone. That's where I have a big problem with organized religions. I like to think we would have evolved beyond that by now. I hope I'm not speaking out of tune here, but
No, but are you showing really the shadow side of organization in general? So that as we become collectivized and organized in terms of our thinking, we stop thinking for ourselves and thinking individually.
yeah,
You
herd
know,
mentality.
exactly. If you find something, keep looking for it. You know, stay to it. Develop the energy to pursue it.
I can feel how much Catherine is inspiring us. You've done so many things, and you've just done them. It seems like you just did what you needed to do. And it's really very inspiring to hear just this little bit of your story, and leaves me curious to go and get your books. I don't know if you've recorded them. I like to listen to books, but given that you're an actress as well.
I've recorded 5 of my books, including the 2 memoirs for
Wonderful, because
Audible. Yeah.
wonderful.
I have a theory, by the way, Diane. I don't know if you all, I think in this group, I can talk about things, or sometimes when I'm traveling and teaching, and when I say things like this, I say it may sound a little woo-woo, but I live in Ojai, California, so, you know, we're known for that here. I think the older the soul, the more we do different things. And I think, to me, the aim is the growth of the soul. That's why we're here. That's the purpose. And it can mean different things. And the soul can be ruthless. It might mean divorce. It might mean illness. It might mean changing careers, changing where you live. But, you know, you might do something like, I thought my whole life would be acting. I couldn't see beyond that compulsion. And then in about my 55th play professionally, it was successful. And yet something told me to stop. So I knew I had learned, my soul had learned what it had to. I didn't understand why, but I've learned early to listen to that inner voice, intuition or whatever. And it was 2 months before I knew I was going to write plays at that point. So I think that's the great guide. Whatever spiritual practice we do, if we listen to that inner voice, and I think, you know, sometimes it means do different things. It's not a good career move. It's probably better to do one thing and become very well known for one thing. And you never know. It's sort of like putting a message in a bottle and throwing it out into the sea. You never know what the response will be.
Thank you for bringing this book in. It's a good slice of a Western exposure to Indian culture. The stories resonate what's going on and how to connect the two cultures. Much more so that, like when I read the Mahabharata or the Ramayana, they were very foreign to me. It was a real different kind of a story.
They're great epics. I think, you know, the end of Mahabharata is the Bhagavad Gita.
Mm-hmm.
It's my favorite text of the Indian. I think if you understand the Bhagavad Gita and live it as much as you can, I don't think you need anything else. It's all there. And one of the great themes of the Bhagavad Gita is do your dharma, not career, but the law of your existence.
Mm-hmm.
Do your dharma and let go of expecting the fruits of the action.
Mm-hmm.
There's the rub, as Shakespeare would say. That's the real challenge, to do what we're called to do, but not to expect the results.
Mm-hmm.
How has that been? I know Dana wants to, maybe we can pull together soon, but before we do, I'm curious, what's that been like for you just as a writer, writing without having, because how do you do it? How do you write without the goal? How do you take the goal out of the process yourself?
Surrender. I surrender to what comes through. When I wrote the Virginia Woolf play, I wrote the play before her diaries and letters were published. This is back in the 70s. And so I had to imagine that she said this and said this. 2 or 3 years after the play, the diaries and letters came out, and some of the things I made up, she had actually said. Now, I've had this happen in 2 or 3 projects now, and it's, to me, very exciting because you actually can tap into something. And the only word I know for it is become a channel. So, you know, sometimes certain things I think I shouldn't put my name because it just, you know, I'm not trying to over enhance it, but that's my experience. So surrender is what I learned in India, spiritually, humanly, creatively. And if you really listen, inner listening, you'll know, because if you're not listening and you choose a project that you're not really called to do, it's a little like dragging a train up a mountain. But if you listen to what you're called to do, and hopefully if the timing is right, there's a certain ease. It seems to happen by itself.
How is listening and receiving or channeling different than the fates? like giving way to the sense of the fates entering your life and letting them take hold.
Let me give an example from Bhutan, the Dancing Girl. It's a true experience. A friend of mine, an actress friend, had just returned from Europe where she did a movie, and she invited me for tea. Her apartment was on Central Park South in Manhattan, overlooking Central Park. So I look forward to seeing my friend. I went into her apartment. As soon as I stepped in the door, I felt ill at ease, like I wasn't safe. And but my logical brain pushed that aside. That was my inner intuitive voice. And I said, that's ridiculous. I've known her for years and so on. She put me in a chair near the window overlooking the park and ordered tea. And as soon as I sat in that chair, my whole body was saying, get out, you're not safe, get out. And I listened. So I had only been in her apartment 10 minutes. I stood up and I said, I'm sorry, Patricia, I'm not feeling well. I have to go. I went out, took a cab, went to my apartment. As I was walking in the door, the phone rang. It was my friend. She said, you'll never believe what just happened just minutes after you left. Now, in New York, the old buildings, they have these air cooler things. They're huge, like 5 foot by 6 foot, big on top of the building. It was a windy day, and that was blown out, dislodged from the building. It crashed into the window and fell on that chair I was sitting. So sometimes that inner voice can save your life. So I don't know where fate is there, but I know as an astrologer, certain things are written and you can follow your path or you can try and resist it. So, the question I've had for decades is what percentage is fate and what is free will? And I've gone back. It's a little of both, of course. I don't know the percentage. I hope by the end of my life, I will have figured that one out.
But it seems you did listen to it.
I listened.
And had you not listened to it, this could have been a drastic set of affairs.
Well, since that time, wherever I am, if I'm walking in a city, and something says, don't go that way, go the other, I don't question, I just follow. And I can be wrong, but that, if I really listen to that inner intuition, it seems to be right. All that I trust it much more than my rational brain, my left brain. And that's why I feel I can speak very openly this. I don't talk about these things in every interview or anything. I would just say, trust yourself, not the ego. It can get you into, I love the saying, the ego's a good servant, but a bad master. And I would say, get to know that authentic self as much as possible. My workshop, Heal Yourself with Writing, is about that. Discovering the authentic voice, creating a deeper dialogue with the self, and just stay with it. We talk about the challenge of relationships. If you don't have the right relationship with the self, the other relationships aren't going to work quite as well. So that's the primary, and I don't mean in terms of selfish ego. I mean in terms of being true to, my family didn't understand why I spent so much time in India. But in the end, I was a better daughter or wife or mother because of, I identified a bit with Jung in his autobiography, who said those 4 years after he broke with Freud became the foundation of everything that followed. those first 2 years in India with the sage became my foundation. And I'm forever grateful to that. The reward was India. That was hopefully my fate. And I will always be grateful and honor that.
I really appreciate you bringing, your wisdom and creativity into this to share it with the community. So the book is East and West Stories of India. And with that, what I think I'm going to do is say a little less, thank people. Ashok, Diane, Catherine, thank you very much.
No,
Will, always a pleasure to see you, even in an airport. I can't believe we did this, And let's just have another go out with a little moment of silence. Thank you all. Thank you, everyone, for showing up this afternoon. It's a beautiful day here in Santa Cruz. It's a hot day in most of California, from what I understand. But Catherine, thank you very much. I appreciate you bringing your scholarship in here. Diane, nice to see you. Diane, wonderful to see you again. Ashok, Will. All right, people. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody,
Goodbye,
so
everybody.
much for everything and all layers.